Okay, so please introduce yourself, your job title, and what you do.
My name is Joyce Ruane. I'm the Executive Associate to the Executive Vice President for Frederick Community College.
Okay, so what do you think is one of the most important things causing inequality in education in our public school system?
I'd have to say that it's the socioeconomic status of the students and the backgrounds that they came from, the environments that they came from, and what they learned growing up. How that impacted them, their role models as they were growing up, what was modeled to them as children, and quite often what was modeled to them is how then they live out their education goals.
Okay, so when buying a home personally, how important is the school district in which you live when you're making that decision?
Vitally important, and almost as important as the number of bedrooms and bathrooms that I want, because I don't want to buy a home in an area where the school system, if I choose to send my child to public school, that the school system is such that my child won't be at an advantage and learning as they should.
So then, to elaborate on that, do you think that all public schools are equal in the education they're giving their students?
Absolutely not.
All right. So give me 1 second here. I'm sorry. Explain how a child's education can be limited by the school they're attending.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm sorry. How a child's education can be limited by the school that they're attending.
Oftentimes, when a child is going to a school where the teachers or the funding is not equivalent to maybe affluent schools, or the motivation for the teachers to teach, or the conditions that they have to teach in are below standards, then it affects the child, and it affects the way that they learn, and that school environment will follow them throughout the rest of their lives.
So if you were to grade the public school systems in your area from A to F, what grade would you give them?
From my perspective, I would say for the high school, I would give it a C. I would say that it's average. But in terms of where my children were more developed and were well-rounded from being in a diverse culture, I would give it an A. And I wouldn't trade that so much for a better teacher or a better school system, only because of who they were as people. So if they weren't developed already as excellent students, then that wouldn't have been my choice. But because they were, and I knew that they would set the example, they benefited from being in an environment that was culturally diverse, that was lower on the socioeconomic status, and that proved to round them out as individuals.
Thank you. All right. So what is your opinion on an open enrollment policy that would allow students to attend any school of their choice so long as there's room, and would fund schools based off of the amount of students that are attending, essentially creating a free market system for public schools?
I like the idea, but I caution about the communication of that and how that would be broadly advertised to everyone so that it would be fair, so that everyone would have the opportunity to be able to partake in that they would have the ability to fill out the appropriate forms, and that they would be able to take advantage of the system. And oftentimes, it could be that folks are unaware, or they're not engaged in their students' education, or they think they have to take what they get. So they're not looking to move out of the situation that they're in to try to improve something for their children. So I can see where it would probably be more of an advantage to more affluent or more highly educated parents, as opposed to those who did not grow up in that type of environment, have a lesser level of education or just social awareness about new laws and regulations.
Right. So going off of that, when President Bush had the No Child Left Behind Act, it stated in there that if a student attended a failing school for more than 2 years, they were allowed to choose a performing school. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that. I was aware of the No Child Left Behind Act, but I was not aware that if the child was in a failing school twice, that they would have the ability to move on.
So then, would you agree that educating families about school choice is one of the most important things to help school choice become successful?
I would say that educating families, it's quite important to know what their choices are for school choice. But again, that depends on the family, their involvement in education, and where they place that in their rank of priority in their life and in their status overall. It may not be something that is of importance to them, and they may just assume that where their child is sent is a place that they would thrive because it's a culture that they're familiar with.
Okay, so then how do you think we could educate families about that, and how could we give lower income families the opportunity to be able to choose a school that would actually help their students thrive without having to compete with more higher income families who might be able to get to more successful schools first?
Well, at the risk of making the assumption that because they're on the lower end of an economic status that they receive some sort of state aid or state funding, that would seem to make the most sense that as they're in agencies applying for assistance, or if they are part of the state system, that this would be one of the tools where it would be mandatory for them to come in to go through a workshop to understand the importance of education for their children, and just to learn how to be more involved in their children's education. And I think that's the bigger issue, is that they don't know that the importance of teaching their children or setting an example for their children, because that's not what they live. So we're just repeating history. And I think another part of this, even though a little off topic, is that the teachers that are in those schools and in those areas. And if the caliber of teacher, it could be that if the caliber of teacher was at a higher level, that would make all the difference in the world. And I can recall having poor teachers that it reflected poorly for my education and hindered me, so that I wasn't thriving in different areas, and then made all the difference when I had an excellent teacher and was able to grasp concepts and move forward. So it could be that we adjust the teachers and pay them more to work in schools that are in at-risk areas.
Right, so going off of that, that's not exactly off topic. Since you are a person that works with budgets in the education system, where do you think funding should be going in the school system?
I think that it should start early on, and that children that, even if they're in daycare, or even if they're in a 3-year-old class, like children's minds are sponges. So if it starts very early on and they get the hunger to learn and the joy of learning, that would help them progress as they grow older. And as the example I gave you earlier, when I was talking about my children, they were already so well-grounded and rooted as good students and knew the value of education that there wasn't a fear of them going to a less than adequate school. So if it starts early in education and they start in pre-K and the K-12 system, then when it's time for them to come up into higher education, they're prepared to excel and to be college ready.
Right, but then you get back to the issue where the higher income families have the advantage of being able to send their students to a preschool or a daycare, where the lower income families might not have that option around them.
That is very true. And again, if we're talking about funding, it could be that those areas are federally funded or given some sort of mandate where their education or a curriculum has been set. If they are state mandated daycare systems, which quite a few are in poorer communities, that part of their state funding would be that there is a curriculum set for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and that they would have to adhere to that curriculum, and that they would have to, that there would be periodic reviews, that there would be an assessment made of what the child is actually learning while in that daycare system.
Okay, so then my final question, do you think that school choice has a place in the educational system? Would that be beneficial for our students? Or do you think that it's just a matter of funding starting at like daycare, preschool level?
I think it's all of the above. I think, yes, school choice does have a place. I think that funding is necessary in younger settings in daycare. And I also, as I said earlier, I think that the caliber of teachers in poorer areas is essential to student success. So I think it's all three. It's a combination of, it's not either or. There's not one size fits all that can correct a system that has just gone awry.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I just have to say.